A woman was cast out of her home after her husband's death. 2 children faced hunger, cold, and fear. But just when they thought it was over, a silent man emerged from the woods and everything changed. Like the video and subscribe for more stories like this. The wind was cutting through the night like a sharp blade. The buttons on Elena's faded coat had long since come undone, but she was trying to shield little Mia, wrapped tightly in the blanket beneath. On her other side, 8-year-old Lucas was walking, his chin lifted to look strong, but the way he struggled not to slip on the ice gave away just how scared he really was. Mia wasn't speaking. She wasn't even crying anymore. Her eyes were empty. She had frozen into a silence that had completely severed her from childhood. Elena, on the other hand, felt like she didn't have the strength left to talk or the tears left to cry. She had been walking since the morning they were thrown out of the house. After her husband's last breath, when his family turned to Elena and said, "You're no longer our responsibility," there wasn't a hint of pity on their faces. They had dug a grave for their own blood, but the only thing they gave his wife and 2 children was an empty sack and the creak of a closing door. Elena hadn't looked back as she left. If she did, she might have wanted to return. Now, all that lay ahead was a winding, ice-covered path and the howl of an approaching storm. Lucas was the first to break the silence. "Mom, I can carry Mia if you want," he said. His voice was raspy, his lips turning purple. Elena paused. When she looked at him, she didn't see a child, she saw a tired soldier still trying to fight. Her heart ached. "No," she whispered. "Hold on a little longer. We're almost there." But even she didn't know where there was. Maybe hope wasn't at the end of the road, but in the heart of someone they'd meet along the way. Snow was getting heavier, the sky a dull gray. The trees stood tall and thin, each one looking like a gravestone. Then a sound. At first, she thought it was the wind. But then it came again. Was it a door slamming? Or footsteps echoing through the forest? Elena stopped. Lucas moved behind her, holding Mia closer. This wasn't just nature. Her instincts whispered that something was watching them. Then, just at that moment, a structure appeared through the trees. An old, abandoned trading cabin. Rotten wood, broken windows. But it was 4 walls and a roof. Elena's eyes filled with tears, her throat tightened. She gathered her last strength and pushed the door. Its rusty hinges groaned. Inside was dark, but at least the wind stayed outside. Lucas rushed in, carefully laid Mia down. Elena found a flint stone in a box beside a small pile of rocks. Her fingers were frozen, but with trembling hands, she tried to start a fire. The first spark flashed, then died. The second, the third. Finally, dry grass caught, and a faint flame lit up the corner of the room. Just when she exhaled, a sound, not from inside, from outside, a growl, deep, menacing. Lucas jumped. Elena grabbed a rusty knife. The cabin door was slightly open. Her eyes locked on the darkness. And then, a shadow, a wolf. Its eyes glowed in the firelight. Elena pulled Mia behind her, drew Lucas close. The wolf stepped forward, hunger in its movements. For a moment, a long moment, it stared, and then turned and vanished into the night. Elena let the knife fall from her hand, shaking. She didn't collapse, because in this fight, there was no turning back now. But the real mystery came. At sunrise, as the first light of morning slipped through the crack in the door, a silhouette appeared. A tall, still, silent man. His face was hidden in shadow, but his eyes locked onto Elena's. He didn't speak. He just placed something on the ground, a piece of cloth wrapped around dried meat and a water flask. That night, Elena met a new kind of fear, curiosity. Who was this man? And why did he help? Elena's hands were trembling as she opened the small bundle the man had left. She wasn't sure if it was from the cold or a kind of unease she couldn't quite name. Dried meat, enough water for a few days. This didn't feel like charity. It felt like a decision made for the sake of survival. Lucas's eyes were fixed on the empty space where the man had disappeared. Was he a hunter? He whispered. Elena didn't answer, because she didn't know. But her instincts were telling her something. That man wasn't just some lost stranger. She couldn't close her eyes that night. Every creak, every howl of the wind inside the cabin turned into a story in her mind. What if the man came back? What if this time he came with demands or a threat? But worst of all, what if he never came back? 2 days passed, and then he came. Not from the shadows this time, but straight through the door. Quiet, but with a calm determination that didn't try to hide its intent. Lucas got up right away. Mia tucked herself against her mother. Elena stoked the fire a little more. The man sat down on the ground without saying a word, not even removing his coat, leaning toward the fire. The bow on his back and the knife at his side weren't flashy, but Elena could tell they weren't just weapons. They carried a past. The man was silent, but his silence had weight. Not death. Experience. Elena couldn't hold it in any longer. "What's your name?" she asked. He lifted his eyes from the fire. After a short pause, he replied in a low, deep voice, "Talon." Elena felt the name's weight like an echo rising from deep within the earth. The name didn't mean anything to her, but the sound of it did. An untrustworthy kind of trust. "Talon, why did you help us?" she asked next. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were sharp. The kind of gaze a woman learns when survival depends on it. Talon didn't answer right away. He held his hands to the fire, then looked over at Lucas. "Because the boy hadn't given up," he said. "Because you were still standing." At that moment, Elena realized something. Talon wasn't watching what they had, but what they'd lost, and whether they could survive in spite of it. This wasn't charity. This was a quiet test. That evening, he left again. But this time, he left behind a rabbit carcass and a sack of pine wood. Elena was beginning to understand him without needing to ask. The next day, he came back. And the day after that, too. Now he would silently enter the cabin, stack wood, drop off the animals he hunted, and when needed, give Lucas small lessons. How to build a fire, how to set a trap, how to track in the cold. Lucas watched closely. Mia too. The fear in their eyes was slowly turning into curiosity. But for Elena, this change wasn't easy. One night, she saw Talon gently adjusting the blanket over Mia as she slept by the fire. His hands were gentle, his eyes alert. Elena didn't move, just watched. "Where are you taking us?" she asked. She knew what the question really meant. "Are we safe?" Talon turned to her, expressionless. But his voice was steady. "To a place you can shelter. A storm's coming. You can't stay here." "What else do I have?" Elena asked. Her voice held no anger, just exhaustion. Talon looked straight at her. "There are always options. But courage is rare." In that moment, Elena understood for the first time this man wasn't just a warrior. He was an observer. He read people, their actions, their silences, their eyes. And he had looked into her, into Elena, with terrifying clarity. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. But what that feeling brought wasn't warmth, it was fear. Because every time she had trusted someone, she ended up losing even more. The snow had thickened. The sky was quiet, but the silence of the coming storm pressed so heavily that it drowned out the rhythm of Elena's heartbeat. When Talon arrived that morning, he brought thick furs, 2 small leather water flasks, and cloth bags filled with warm, dried meat. There was no need for words, it was time to go. Elena looked at the worn-down walls of the cabin one last time. There was no regret or hope in her eyes, only the firmness of a woman who knew she had to keep moving. She wrapped Mia in a blanket. Lucas carried a small bag around his neck with the ropes and hunting knife Talon had given him. He was no longer just a child, he was like a silent watchman now. When they set out, Talon walked in front. His footsteps on the hardened snow were steady and rhythmic. Lucas followed closely behind, trying to match his steps, walking at the same angles. Elena trailed a bit behind, carrying Mia in her arms, eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Every rustle, every shadow between the trees felt like a threat. That's why trusting Talon was hard. Because no matter how much he'd helped, there was still so much left unsaid behind his silence. Hours passed. Walking in ankle-deep snow tested both their bodies and their patience. As the trees grew denser, their visibility shrank, and the wind turned into a whisper within the forest. By noon, they reached a stream half frozen. Its surface cracked, but water still flowed underneath. Talon paused for a moment and turned to Elena. "Watch closely. Step where I step." He took the first step. The ice cracked, but didn't break. 3 steps. 4. Then he was across. Lucas followed without even blinking. But on the 4th step, a low rumble came from beneath the ice. Elena's heart stopped. Lucas's foot slipped. Slushy water rose, and in that instant, time froze. Talon launched back like an arrow. In one swift move, he bent over the ice, grabbed Lucas by the arm, and pulled him across. Before the crack could grow, they were off the ice. Shivering, Lucas ran straight to his mother. Elena wrapped her arms around her son, but her eyes were on Talon. He said nothing. He just looked at Lucas. "Sometimes being strong means paying attention," he said, then turned and started walking again. By sunset, they reached a rocky overhang they could shelter under. It was as if Talon had prepared a camp there in advance, some planks, layered animal hides, and an old fire pit surrounded by stones. He quickly gathered wood and lit a fire. Smoke drifted gently into the sky. Elena tucked the exhausted children into the furs. This time, Lucas fell asleep without a word. But Mia couldn't take her eyes off Talon. Her tiny fingers played with the beads on his coat. He didn't stop her. Elena was surprised. This man didn't seem the type to show affection to any child. Yet now, Mia's little fingers were loosening his silence. That night, Elena quietly sat beside Talon. The sparks of the fire reflected in his eyes. "Why did you save us?" she asked again. Talon was silent for a long while. Then, without looking away from the flames, he said, "Because once, I was left behind too. The one who found me didn't speak. But he carried me. Now I don't speak either. But I don't leave people behind." Elena froze at those words. For the first time, she sensed he had a past. But it wasn't a story to be told, it was something that could only be felt through what he'd lived. In the silence of the night, the only sound was the crackling wood. But within that fire, a crack formed in the frozen ground inside Elena. For the first time, the warmth she felt wasn't from fear, but from something slowly approaching. The next morning, the sky was even darker. It was completely covered with heavy gray clouds. It felt like the sun hadn't risen at all. Talon didn't say a word as he packed up the camp, but every movement he made was quick, focused, and tense. Elena could feel it. Talon wasn't just on alert against nature anymore, there was another, unseen threat he was sensing. The silence was heavy as they set off. Lucas now mimicked Talon with every step, crouching when he crouched, holding his breath when he paused. Mia was on Elena's back, her arms wrapped around her mother's neck, eyes buried in the darkness of the forest. But only a few hours later, Talon suddenly stopped. He crouched down and pressed his fingers into the snow. "A handprint," he said quietly. Elena's throat went dry. "Is it one of ours?" "No." Suddenly, Talon reached for the bough on his shoulder. His eyes locked into the shadows. The footprints were large, it was clearly more than one person. The tracks looked fresh, the cold hadn't erased them yet. That meant the forest wasn't only home to wild animals anymore. And people found in the woods were rarely there for good reasons. Talon moved ahead, following the tracks silently. Elena pulled the children under a tree and held them close. Talon disappeared into the darkness. Minutes later, he returned, but he wasn't alone. A man. His face was bloodied, his shoulder bandaged. He was barely able to stand. Elena instinctively pulled back, but Talon's look told her they were safe. "Traitor," Talon said. He was ambushed. He was carrying mail. The man's name was Marcus. His breathing was rapid, but he was conscious. There were 3 of them, armed. They were after animal skins, food, and children, he said in a hoarse voice. It felt like a spike of ice pierced Elena's chest. "Children?" she asked, her voice trembling without meaning to. Marcus nodded. "When winter comes, some people trade differently." Those words echoed in Elena's ears, and her hands began to shake. Until now, she had only fought hunger and abandonment. But now, she was seeing a different face of the darkness, one that looked human, but had no humanity left. Talon made a decision right away. "We'll change our path," he said. "But first, we need to set up camp. A storm's coming." The new campsite was in a rockier area. While Elena brought the children and Marcus into the shelter, Talon stayed outside. He built the fire, set the traps, never closed his eyes. All night, he listened closely to every snapping twig, because the hunters might still be tracking them, or worse, already watching. Elena didn't sleep that night. While she sat by the fire, she noticed Talon's back was turned to her, but his focus never wavered. His silence no longer felt frightening. It felt protective, but the questions inside her were growing. Who was this man? Why was he so skilled at tracking? And why was he so gentle with the children? Just before dawn, Elena quietly approached him. "You've met them before, haven't you?" she asked. Her voice nearly evaporated into the freezing air. Talon didn't turn his head, but he didn't say yes or no. He only said, "They came for me once, too." And then, silence. That sentence stuck in Elena's mind like a splinter. "They came for me, too. So he had once been alone, targeted by someone. And now, maybe the people he was protecting weren't just Elena's children but echoes of someone he once couldn't save. In that moment, Elena understood something else. This man wasn't running from the ghosts of his past. He was following them looking for someone to protect. Maybe this was how he was trying to forgive himself. And for the first time, Elena couldn't suppress the thought that crossed her mind. Maybe we weren't just rescued. Maybe we were chosen. In the early hours of the morning, the world was almost a single color, a grayish silence emerging from within the white. Marcus was still lying by the fire, his wound bandaged but his eyes alert. Lucas was outside the shelter with Talon. Talon was showing him how to make a simple bow, occasionally glancing off into the depths of the forest. Elena was inside with Mia, but her spirit was already outside. She felt it too. Something was approaching. And it wasn't the storm, it was people. That day, Talon didn't speak. Not even to answer Lucas's questions, he only nodded. By noon, the sky had darkened. When Talon returned to camp, his eyes were dull but focused. When Elena met his gaze, she understood. The threat wasn't far anymore, it was close. "Get ready," was all he said. That day, Elena learned how much could be said with just a few words. Traps were set around the camp. Marcus was given an old knife. Lucas was tasked only with keeping the fire alive, but even that felt heavy to him, because he no longer wanted to be someone who needed protecting. By sunset, the camp was silent. No wind, no birds, only waiting. And then, a snap. Talon crouched without moving a muscle. His eyes locked onto the darkness. Elena pulled Mia into her arms, her hand gently touching Marcus's shoulder. Everyone braced themselves. Lucas gave his mother a look that made her heart break. Her son was no longer a child. This wasn't a world where children grew up through imagination, but through survival, through trials made of harsh reality. The first man approached the shelter quietly. His shadow merged with the firs, only visible by the flicker of the fire's reflection. But just as he was about to slip inside, snap, he stepped on a trap. The rope tangled around his leg, pulling him to the ground. He screamed, and that sound was the signal for the others hiding in the forest. 3 more rushed in. Marcus swung his blade, but fell immediately. Talon had already dropped his bow. One of the men charged at him with an axe. Talon deflected the swing and struck his attacker's knee. The man collapsed. Another tried to stab Talon with a chained blade, but Talon drove his own knife into him. The scream shattered the winter silence. Elena stood at the shelter's entrance, trying to shield Mia. The third man headed their way. She grabbed a piece of firewood and waited. But just as the man reached them, something unexpected happened. Lucas lunged. Just like Talon had taught him, he struck the man's leg from the perfect angle to throw him off balance. The man staggered. Elena took the chance and swung the wood. It hit his head cleanly. He dropped to the ground. When it was over, there were 4 bodies around the camp. 2 dead, 2 badly wounded. Talon said nothing. He tied them up and dragged them beyond the camp. The decision was clear: they'd either be left behind or exiled. Elena didn't ask. She knew now. This world didn't hand out second chances for free. That night, a heavy silence settled over the camp. But this time, it wasn't a threat, it was a turning point. Elena sat across from Talon. There was no blood on their hands, but there was weariness in their eyes. "My son," she said softly. "I couldn't protect him, not even from myself." Talon lowered his head. "Your son is no longer alone." Elena closed her eyes. A single tear slid down her cheek. "Who are you, Talon?" she asked, this time without holding back. Talon was quiet for a long time. Then he looked up. His eyes flickered like the shadows dancing in the firelight. "I was once a man who lived only for himself. But one day, a little girl cried, and I couldn't silence that cry. That day, I forgot who I was, and chose who I would become." For the first time, Elena didn't see the shadow in him, she saw the light. And that night, for the first time, she was grateful not just for surviving, but for sharing survival with someone else. A rescued camp wasn't just about driving the enemies away. The hardest part was silencing the fear inside. That night, the camp was quiet, but this time, the silence wasn't a threat. It was healing. The flames flickered, shadows danced, and for the first time, people were simply breathing. When Elena woke up in the morning, Mia was still in her arms. The little girl's breathing was steady. Her eyelids twitched slightly, as if even in her sleep, she had found peace. Lucas sat by the fire, carving something from wood with the small knife Talon had given him. Elena squinted. It was a bird. Rough, but with determined lines. Like hope. Talon had left early that morning. Without a trace. Elena noticed right away. A strange emptiness filled her, but it wasn't unfamiliar. Being left, forgotten, abandoned. Those were ghosts she had fought for years. But this time, it felt different. Talon's absence didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a promise to return. And by midday, he did. With food wrapped in deer hide over his shoulder and stones carved with symbols in his hand, he returned. He sat quietly in the center of the camp, looked at the children. "Are you ready?" was all he said. Elena didn't respond, but she stood up and held out her hand. A journey began. Now neither the cold nor the snow felt the same. The path took them through the depths of the forest to the base of a mountain. Days passed. Talon didn't speak much, but he showed. He showed Lucas how to light a fire, Mia which plants weren't poisonous, and Elena how not just to survive but to live without saying a word. And finally, they arrived. A hidden valley nestled between stone walls, surrounded by streams. A few small shelters built from stone and hide. Smoke rising from a hearth. The sound of birds, the trickle of water, and a quiet sense of safety from far away. This was Talon's camp. But when Elena looked around, she realized it was a home. The first day passed in silence. On the second day, as Elena bent over the water, she heard Talon teaching the children how to mimic bird calls. On the third day, Lucas set a trap all by himself. On the fourth, Mia hugged Talon without saying a word. And in that moment, Elena felt her walls begin to fall. All that was left in her heart was something that finally dared to beat again: trust. One evening, as Elena and Talon sat by the fire, their eyes met. They didn't speak for a long time. Only the wind moved between the trees beside them. Finally, Elena asked, "Why? Did you want me to stay?" Talon didn't look away. "Because you don't belong anywhere else. Not just because you're strong, but because you stayed standing, even when you were broken." Elena didn't try to stop the tears from forming. She didn't feel ashamed. Because this time, crying wasn't weakness, it was freeing herself from the hands of the past. As the night deepened, the children had fallen asleep. Talon offered Elena his fur. "It'll be cold," he said. Elena nodded and took it, but then she paused. Holding the fur in her hands, she asked, "Will you be here tomorrow too?" Talon looked up. His eyes were like a silent vow. "If you want me to, I'll always be here." In that moment, Elena was no longer a helpless widow, a fleeing mother, or someone who needed protection. She was someone strong enough to make a choice. And she did choose. The future. Talon. Herself. This wasn't just a story of survival anymore. It was a rebirth, where trust rose from ashes and love bloomed in silence. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories like this. Because the road home means more when we walk it together.